Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into a topic that gets a lot of attention, sparks a lot of debate: human mating systems. You've probably heard all sorts of things, right? Like humans are naturally monogamous, or maybe, the complete opposite.
Definitely. It's one of those perennial questions.
So our big question for this deep dive is basically this: are humans, biologically wired for monogamy? Or is it more something society constructed?
Right.
And to figure this out, we've looked at a whole range of stuff: anthropology, evolutionary biology, psychology, even some interesting online chats, actually.
Yeah.
We're going to try and piece it all together for you.
And that's really the goal here, isn't it?
Yeah.
To unpack all that complexity.
Yeah.
Because it's so often presented as like an either or thing.
Yeah.
But it's really not. It's much more about how our biology and our culture kind of weave together to shape relationships.
Okay, let's break this down then. This whole idea of human monogamy, or maybe the lack of it, it really does stir things up. A lot of us grow up thinking relationships should look a certain way, but then, reality seems a lot messier, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And the sources we looked at confirm that pretty quickly. Human mating isn't just one thing.
Yeah.
You see monogamy, sure, but also polyandry, polygyny, short-term stuff. Most societies actually have like a mix of these.
Yeah, I saw that point in one of the online discussions we reviewed. Someone put it perfectly. They asked, are humans socially or biologically monogamous? And the answer was basically yes, but also it's complicated.
That sums it up nicely. And what's really fascinating is how our biology seems to nudge us in certain directions relationship-wise, but it's definitely not a hard shove,
Oh.
Like if you look at the standard biological clues,
Yeah.
things like sexual dimorphism.
You mean like males being bigger or more muscular than females?
Exactly. Or relative testes size, which can hint at how much males compete for mates, specifically through sperm competition in some species.
Right. Bigger usually means more competition, more partners.
Yeah. Generally, yeah. But humans, compared to our great ape cousins, we're kind of in the middle on those things.
Huh. So not strongly pointing one way or the other.
Pretty much. It suggests our evolutionary history of sexual selection was unique, but it doesn't scream monogamy or polygamy. It's more ambiguous.
So if we're in the middle, biologically speaking, what does push us towards certain patterns? Is there anything specific in our biology?
Well, the biology doesn't give a simple yes-no on monogamy, like you said. It points towards flexibility. But the really big factor, the thing that makes humans different, is altriciality.
Altriciality, meaning how helpless our babies are.
Precisely. Human infants are completely dependent at birth, and they need intense parental care for years. I mean, it's an incredibly long period of immaturity.
Yeah, like up to 14, 18 years sometimes. And just learning basic stuff takes, 6 or 7 years?
Right. And humans usually have just one baby at a time. So raising a child is a massive undertaking compared to other mammals. A huge burden, evolutionarily speaking.
Okay, so that helplessness.
That leads directly into the biparental care argument. The idea is basically that having a father who stuck around to help protect and maybe provide for the child gave that child a better survival edge.
Right. Compared to kids raised only by their mothers. Makes sense.
It creates a strong evolutionary reason for males to invest more than just sperm.
Okay, that makes sense for survival. But does biparental care automatically equal monogamy? I mean, couldn't a father help out more than one family?
That's the key point. No, it doesn't require fidelity. Biparental care and monogamy aren't the same thing.
Ah.
You absolutely see biparental care in many human societies that practice polygyny, where males provide resources for multiple wives and their children.
So what's the advantage for the male sticking around in that scenario, or even in a monogamous one, from an evolutionary angle?
Well, because human kids need so much investment for so long, the father's contribution, resources, protection, whatever, becomes a much larger, more significant chunk of the total needed. It's not just the mother providing everything post-birth.
Because his input is more symmetrical, more impactful.
Exactly. It makes male investment really count.
Yeah.
But, and this is important, even biologically, true lifelong genetic monogamy, like you see in, say, prairie voles, it's super rare in mammals.
Prairie voles are always the example, aren't they?
They are. And even in species we call monogamous, biologically there's often what we'd call cheating or extraparamating going on.
So it suggests maybe humans have always had a kind of flexible strategy?
A mixed reproduction strategy, yeah.
Yeah.
That seems plausible. Where you see monogamy, serial monogamy, non-monogamy, all potentially coexisting, depending on the individuals and the circumstances. Biology sets a stage, but doesn't seem to dictate just one script.
Which is where culture comes in. This is where it gets really interesting, I think, because biology lays the groundwork, right? But culture, wow, it builds the whole house. And cultural evolution, it's not just about genes passing down, it's ideas, behaviors, technologies, stuff we learn from each other.
And crucially, how it spreads is different. Genes are mostly parent to child, right? Vertical. But culture, it goes sideways from friends, from mentors, obliquely from other adults, all over the place. And it can change so much faster than genes, sometimes, like within a single generation.
And we don't just passively absorb it either, do we? There's this idea of biased cultural transmission. We actively choose who or what we copy.
Exactly. There are different biases influencing what catches on, like conformity bias, basically, copying what most people are doing. Think fashion trends or popular baby names.
Okay.
Or the opposite, sometimes rarity or novelty bias, seeking out something new and different. Then there's prestige bias.
Copying high-status people.
Yeah, learning from individuals who seem important or get a lot of attention. Kids copying adults is a classic example. And then success bias, copying someone because what they're doing clearly works.
Like using a tool that helps you hunt better so others copy you.
Precisely. You see someone succeed, you try what they did.
So how does this relate back to monogamy becoming a norm? Was it seen as successful?
Well, one idea is that over time, maybe it was observed that kids raised in stable, perhaps monogamous-leaning setups, maybe with a strong father-child bond, tended to do better, be more successful.
Ah, so a kind of success bias kicks in socially.
Could be. And perhaps it also reduced conflict, jealousy between partners compared to some other arrangements. A more peaceful option, perhaps, that gained traction culturally.
And this ties into that other concept you mentioned, cultural niche construction.
Yes, exactly. That's the idea that humans don't just adapt to their environment. We actively change our environment through our cultural practices. And those changes then feed back and alter the evolutionary pressures we face.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about agriculture. That cultural invention allowed populations to explode, completely changing the selective landscape, or the cultural norm that emerged in many places favoring smaller families that drove the whole demographic transition.
Right. Or even just building shelters using fire.
Absolutely. Fire changed our diet and social lives.
Yeah.
Shelters let us live almost anywhere. These are cultural innovations that reshaped our environment and consequently the selective pressures on us. It's a constant interplay.
So we've got this biological flexibility, and then culture starts shaping norms, maybe favoring monogamy for its perceived benefits, possibly related to child-rearing success, maybe social stability. But then, how does society lock that norm in? How does it get defined and, well, enforced?
Yeah, that's the next logical step.
Yeah.
And it brings us to looking at monogamy not just as a biological or social pattern, but as an institution. And this is where some more critical perspectives come in, like the work of John McMurtry back in the 70s.
He had a pretty radical take, didn't he?
He did. He argued that conventional monogamous marriage, as it developed, wasn't primarily about love or companionship, but was fundamentally a cultural requirement and essentially a massive social control mechanism, even a form of property ownership.
Wow. Social control. How did he see that working?
He broke it down into four main principles, as he saw them, in the conventional model. First, the formal contract. It's state-controlled, uniform terms. And crucially, at the time he was writing, he highlighted it was basically the only contract in English-speaking law you couldn't just dissolve by mutual agreement. The state had to approve.
Okay, state control. What else?
Second, the binary limit, the two and only two partners rule. He saw this as incredibly restrictive, limiting wider social bonds and intimacy and forcing what he called a binary frame of sexual consciousness.
So locking people into pairs, essentially.
Right. Third, the one-at-a-time rule. No bigamy, it's a crime. He even argued that rising divorce rates weren't a fundamental change, just a widening of an escape hatch within the same basic structure.
Still operating within that one-at-a-time framework.
Exactly. And fourth, the principle of sexual exclusivity. A strict ban on any sexual relationship outside the marriage, even, quote, lesser forms of sexual and erotic relationships. And the penalties for breaking this could be severe social ostracism, losing your kids, your job.
That's a pretty bleak picture of marriage. Did he address the common justifications, like love or raising children?
He did, but he was pretty dismissive. He argued those claims that monogamy uniquely fosters profound affection, or is the best loving context for child upbringing, were basically without force. He felt there wasn't solid evidence they were superior to other arrangements in those respects.
So his conclusion was?
His provocative conclusion was that if you strip away all the layers of sanctity, apologetic, and taboo, marriage in its traditional institutional form was simply a form of private property.
Property? How did he support that?
He pointed to historical practices like dowries, inheritance laws focused on legitimacy, even things like daughter sales in some cultures, and the actual language in traditional vows to have and to hold, mine. He saw echoes of ownership.
Okay, that's a challenging perspective. Does he link it to broader societal structures?
Oh, absolutely. He went further, arguing this specific form of marriage was actually indispensable for keeping the capitalist system going.
How did he figure that?
Well, he saw parallels, like the exclusive use of a partner mirroring exclusive use of labor in a job. He thought it related sexual need to ownership concepts. He also theorized it channeled primordial sexual energies away from immediate gratification and towards striving for business or professional success.
Sort of. Sublimating desire into work.
Kind of. He argued it created a sexual shortage that fueled ambition and hierarchical achievement, and that it disciplined people for hard work by teaching them to repress natural impulses. And maybe most cynically, he suggested it created a pool of unsatisfied sexual desires that consumer culture could then exploit. Advertising could tap into that lack to create new wants.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to chew on. It's a very specific, very critical lens on institutionalized monogamy.
Definitely a critical perspective, yeah. Important to understand it as one interpretation of historical function linked to a specific socioeconomic critique.
So fast forward to today. We have these historical and biological contexts, these critiques. And now we see much more open discussion and practice of things like polyamory. How does that fit in? What does the current research say about those kinds of relationships?
Right, so polyamory, it's generally defined as a form of consensual non-monogamy, or CNM. That means having multiple intimate relationships, could be sexual, could be romantic, often both, but crucially, with the full knowledge and consent of everyone involved.
And it's different from swinging, right? Or polygamy.
Yeah, important distinctions. Swinging tends to focus more on casual sexual encounters, often couples swapping partners, without necessarily deep emotional bonds with the additional partners. And polygamy, legally and often culturally, refers specifically to marriage with multiple people, most often polygyny. One man married to multiple women. Polyamory is more about the structure of ongoing intimate relationships.
Okay. And is it common? I feel like I hear about it more, but...
The numbers are actually pretty surprising. Research suggests at least 1 in 5 Americans has tried a consensually non-monogamous relationship at some point.
1 in 5. Wow.
Yeah. And about 1 in 20 say they're in one right now.
Yeah.
And maybe the most important finding from the research is about satisfaction.
What about it?
Studies consistently show that people in CNM relationships report being just as satisfied, just as fulfilled, and getting just as much happiness from their relationships as married people do.
So the relationship structure itself doesn't automatically mean less happiness or satisfaction?
Doesn't seem to, no.
Yeah.
As long as it's working for the people involved.
But I imagine it takes a lot of work. It sounds complex to manage.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely challenging. Success in polyamory seems to demand a lot of openness, ongoing consent, deep trust, really excellent communication skills, setting clear boundaries, and mutual respect. It's not easy.
What are some common hurdles people face?
Well, managing jealousy is a big one, obviously. Though many people in poly relationships talk about working through jealousy rather than just avoiding it. Another thing is managing new relationship energy, or NRE. Yeah, that initial excitement and intensity when you start a new relationship. It can sometimes feel threatening or destabilizing to existing relationships if it's not handled with care and communication.
Makes sense. Are there reported upsides beyond just having multiple partners?
People report a lot of benefits, actually. Things like big opportunities for personal growth, learning more about yourself, deepening connections with existing partners through honesty. Some women report feeling greater relational power compared to monogamous dynamics. Practical things, too, sometimes, like extra help with childcare in larger poly families or networks. And often, perhaps counterintuitively to some, people report increased commitment among partners because it's all so intentional.
And what about kids? That's often the first question people ask, isn't it? How does it affect children?
It is a common concern, but the research we have so far consistently finds that kids raised in polyamorous families do just as well on most measures, psychological health, school achievement, social functioning, as kids from monogamous families. Yeah. The key seems to be what's key in any family structure. stability, resources, and open, honest communication about relationships in an age-appropriate way.
And the sources mentioned it being a choice.
Right. The perspective often shared by people who practice polyamory is that it's a conscious choice. It stems from their philosophical beliefs about relationships or chosen desires, maybe even coping mechanisms learned over time. It's not seen as just acting on uncontrollable urges, but involves actively doing the work, looking inward, communicating, negotiating.
Despite these findings on satisfaction and kids doing okay, there's still stigma, right?
Oh, definitely. Significant stigma. That study showing 1 in 4 poly individuals experiencing discrimination is telling. Many people practice it privately because of fears about judgment, job loss, or even losing custody of their children.
Is it legal?
Polyamory itself, having multiple relationships, is legal in the U.S., but polygamy, being legally married to more than one person, is not. And even in C&M relationships, people can face legal discrimination in things like housing, employment, or child custody battles because the legal system is built around monogamous assumptions.
Although didn't one city recognize poly relationships recently?
Yeah, Somerville, Massachusetts made news by becoming the first U.S. city to grant legal recognition to polyamorous domestic partnerships, giving them some of the same rights as married couples, like hospital visitation. It's a small step, but significant.
So this all brings up that bigger question again. How do these biological underpinnings we talked about way back at the start interact with this incredibly complex, evolving cultural landscape of relationships? How does that interplay shape us?
It really loops back beautifully to this core idea of gene-culture coevolution. It's such a powerful concept.
Remind us what that means again.
It's the idea that culture isn't just layered on top of biology. They interact and influence each other's evolution. Cultural traits, practices, beliefs, technologies can actually change the environment in ways that alter the selective pressures on our genes. And sometimes genetic changes can enable new cultural possibilities.
Like the lactose tolerance example.
Exactly. That's the classic case. Most mammals stop producing lactase, the enzyme to digest milk sugar, after weaning. But in human populations that adopted the cultural practice of domesticating cattle and dairying, a genetic mutation allowing lactase persistence into adulthood became strongly advantageous and spread rapidly. Culture literally changed our genes related to diet.
Wow.
And understanding this coevolution is absolutely critical today, especially when we look at complex genetic data. For traits like years of schooling, who people marry, even things like IQ test scores or poverty, trying to explain these just with genetics is incredibly misleading, potentially dangerous.
Because culture plays such a massive role.
A massive role. Ignoring the cultural context, the social structures, the opportunities, the biases, leads to potentially harmful misinterpretations of what genetic predispositions might mean, if anything, for these complex outcomes.
So it's never just nature or nurture, it's always this intricate dance between them.
Always. And marriage itself, as an institution, is a perfect example of this. It's shaped by the social structure of a society, its norms, its economics, its power dynamics, but it also shapes that structure in return.
How so?
Well, historically and even now, marriage rules influence social hierarchy. Think about arranged marriages, reinforcing class lines, or who can inherit property. It plays a huge role in social mobility, or lack thereof, and social change.
And we're seeing those definitions evolve rapidly now.
Absolutely. Modernization, people moving to cities, globalization, these huge cultural shifts have led to things like the decline of arranged marriage in many places, the rise of love marriages, and critically evolving definitions of what marriage and family even mean.
Like recognizing same-sex marriage.
Exactly. And the increasing visibility and acceptance to varying degrees of diverse family forms, single-parent households, blended families, chosen families, polyamorous networks. The cultural landscape of relationships is arguably more diverse and fluid now than ever before.
So to kind of wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
it seems clear that human relationships are incredibly complex. They're woven from these threads of biological potential, yes, but also this really dynamic cultural evolution, and ultimately the conscious choices individuals make. Trying to just slap a label on humans, monogamous or polygamous, really misses that whole rich, complicated picture.
It absolutely does. It simplifies something that is inherently multifaceted. Biology provides potentials, culture shapes possibilities, and individuals navigate within that.
So where does that leave us?
Well, perhaps with a final thought to ponder. If our history shows us anything, it's that even our deep-seated urges and patterns can be profoundly shaped by our culture. Think dairying changing our genes, or modernization changing marriage norms. And if human connection in some form seems to be the core need, What new ways of forming relationships, of defining connection might emerge as our cultures continue to shift and change? And maybe more personally for you, the listener, how will you choose to define connection and partnership for yourself in this evolving landscape?